Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Starfire, watching the stars through the main view screen. The ship had been patrolling the outer rim for 3 months now, checking on the distant colonies and making sure the trade routes stayed safe. It was quiet work, the kind that let a man think too much about home. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," said Lieutenant Amy Carter from her station. She was young, maybe 25, with short blonde hair and quick fingers that danced across her control panel. Massive energy readings coming from the New Texas system. Jake walked over to her station. New Texas was one of the farming worlds, peaceful and far from any conflict zones. "What kind of energy readings?" "I don't know, sir. Nothing in our databases matches this signature." "It's huge though, bigger than anything we've ever recorded." Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. In his 15 years of space service, he had learned to trust his instincts. Right now, those instincts were screaming danger. Set course. For New Texas, maximum speed. The Starfire jumped to hyperspace, covering the distance in 4 hours. When they dropped back into normal space, Jake's worst fears came true. Where the busy shipping lanes around New Texas should have been, he saw a sight that would haunt him forever. Ships filled the space around the planet. Not human ships, though. These vessels looked like nothing Jake had ever seen. They were huge, easily 10 times the size of the largest human battleships. Their hulls seemed to pulse with a sickly green light, and they moved through space like living things swimming through water. "My God," whispered Amy, "there must be hundreds of them." Jake grabbed the communications microphone. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Morrison of the human ship Starfire. Please respond and identify yourselves." Silence filled the bridge. The alien ships continued their slow dance around New Texas, completely ignoring the tiny human vessel. "Try all frequencies," Jake ordered. "Emergency channels, diplomatic protocols, everything." Amy's fingers flew over her controls. "Nothing, Captain. They're not responding to anything. It's like they can't hear us or they just don't care." Through the view screen, Jake watched the alien fleet move closer to New Texas, the planet's defense. Stations, small automated platforms that protected the farming settlements, opened fire on the approaching ships. Bright beams of energy lanced out from the stations, striking the alien hulls. The beams did nothing. They hit the strange ships and simply disappeared, like drops of rain hitting a lake. Then the aliens fired back. Jake had seen many weapons in his years of service. Plasma cannons, missile batteries, railguns that could punch through solid steel. What he saw now made all of those look like toys. The alien weapons didn't fire beams or projectiles. Instead, they seemed to reach out with invisible hands and simply erase the defense stations. One moment the platforms were there, the next they were gone, not destroyed, not blown apart, just gone as if they had never existed. "Captain," Amy's voice was shaking now. "I'm picking up transmissions from the planet, emergency broadcasts from the colonies. Put them through." The bridge filled with voices, dozens of them all talking at once. Farmers, settlers, children, all screaming in terror. Through the chaos, Jake heard fragments of what was happening on the surface. "They're not attacking the cities," one voice said. "They're doing something to them. The buildings are just melting away." "The people," another voice cried. "Oh God, what's happening to the people? They're dissolving, just falling apart." Jake's hands clenched into fists. "How long until Admiral Hughes arrives with the fleet?" "6 hours, sir," reported his navigation officer, a steady man named Carl Brooks. "The nearest battle group is at Proxima Station." 6 hours. Jake looked at the alien fleet surrounding New Texas and knew that in 6 hours, there would be nothing left to save. The communications from the planet were getting weaker now. The screens were fading, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow worse than the terror. Through his ship's telescopes, Jake watched the surface of New Texas change. The green fields and silver cities were turning gray, then black, then simply disappearing. "Captain," Amy said quietly, "I'm reading massive energy absorption from the planet. It's like those ships are eating it." Jake had commanded ships in battle before. He had faced pirates and rebels, and even rogue military units. But this was different. This wasn't war. It wasn't even conquest. This was something else entirely. Something that made his mind struggle to understand what he was seeing. The alien ships worked with horrible efficiency. They spread out over the planet's surface, each one extending what looked like feeding tubes down into the atmosphere. Where the tubes touched, everything died. Not just the people and animals, but the plants, the soil, even the rocks themselves. Hours passed in horrified silence on the Starfire's bridge. Jake's crew watched helplessly as New Texas was consumed. The once green world turned into a gray ball of nothing, stripped of everything that had made it a live dot. When Admiral Ben Hughes finally arrived with his fleet of 30 warships, there was nothing left to fight for. The alien ships had finished their work and were already moving away from what had been New Texas. The planet hung in space like a dead eye, empty and lifeless. "Captain Morrison," Admiral Hughes' voice came through the communication system. "Report." Jake stared at the dead world. "They came out of nowhere, Admiral. Hundreds of ships, technology we've never seen before. They didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't even seem to notice we were here. They just consumed everything. Casualties? Total, sir. 3 million people, gone. The entire colony wiped out in less than 8 hours." The Admiral's fleet spread out, scanning the area for any trace of the attackers. They found nothing but empty space and the corpse of New Texas. The alien ships had vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. Then the message came. It arrived on all frequencies at once, burning through every communication system in the human fleet. The voice was not one voice, but many, speaking in perfect unison in a language that somehow every human could understand. "Your species has been selected for processing. We are the harvesters. We consume worlds and the life upon them. Your resistance will only prolong your suffering. Submit now and your end will be swift." The message repeated 3 times, then silence returned to space. Jake looked around his bridge at his crew. Amy was pale, her hands shaking as she tried to make sense of the readings on her instruments. Carl was staring at the dead planet, his face blank with shock. Even his security chief, Twofold Pete Garcia, looked shaken. "Captain," Admiral Hughes' voice came through again. "Set course for Earth, emergency speed. We need to warn the colonies and prepare for what's coming." Jake nodded to his navigation officer. "You heard the Admiral. Get us home." As the Starfire jumped to hyperspace, Jake took one last look at New Texas. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew that what they had witnessed was just the beginning. The harvesters had announced their presence to humanity in the most terrifying way possible. They had shown that human weapons meant nothing to them, that human defenses were useless. But Jake Morrison had spent his life in space, and he knew something about humanity that the harvesters didn't. Humans were stubborn. When pushed to the wall, when faced with impossible odds, they didn't give up. They got angry. The harvesters had just made 3 billion humans very, very angry. 3 weeks after New Texas died, the harvesters struck again. This time they came for the mining colonies at Beta Centauri, where 50,000 humans worked the asteroid fields pulling precious metals from the rocks. Admiral Ben Hughes had been waiting for them. The human fleet was ready this time. 60 warships spread across the system, their weapons charged and crews at battle stations. Hughes stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Defender, watching the tactical display as the alien ships dropped out of hyperspace. "Count them," he ordered his tactical officer. 87 ships, Admiral. Same design as before, but some are larger. Hughes nodded grimly. The harvesters had brought more ships, bigger ones. They were learning too. All ships, this is Admiral Hughes, weapons free. Show these things what humans do to monsters. The battle began with a thunder of human weapons. Plasma cannons fired streams of superheated gas across space. Missile batteries launched hundreds of warheads at the alien fleet. Railguns hurled chunks of metal at incredible speeds. The darkness between the stars lit up like a deadly fireworks show. Commander Rick Stone sat in the cockpit of his fighter, the Hellcat, watching the battle unfold around him. He led Squadron 7, 24 of the best pilots in the fleet. They waited for their chance to strike. Squadron 7, this is Stone. Wait for my mark. Let the big guns do their work first. The human weapons struck the harvester ships with tremendous force. For a moment, Hughes allowed himself to hope. Several alien vessels staggered under the assault, their green glow flickering. But then something horrible happened. The damaged ships began to heal themselves. The holes blown in their hulls sealed shut. The flickering lights grew bright again. Within minutes, the harvester fleet was whole once more. "Impossible," whispered Hughes' tactical officer. "They're regenerating." Then the harvesters fired back. Their weapons reached across space like invisible claws, tearing human ships apart. The cruiser Portland simply vanished. There 1 second, and gone the next. The destroyer Falcon broke in half, spilling its crew into the cold vacuum. "Squadron 7, go now." Hughes shouted over the radio. "Get in close before we lose more ships." "Rick." Stone pushed his fighter to maximum speed. The Hellcat screamed through space, dodging alien fire as it closed with the enemy fleet. Around him, his pilots followed, their small ships weaving between the massive harvester vessels. "Target the smaller ships," Stone ordered. "Maybe we can hurt them if we get close enough." The fighters dove in, their cannons blazing. Up close, the alien ships were even more disturbing. Their hulls pulsed like living skin, and strange growths extended from their surfaces like tumors. Some of the growths looked almost like faces, twisted and screaming. Stone's weapons found their mark. On a harvester ship about the size of a human destroyer. The alien vessel's hull split open, bleeding a thick green fluid into space. "I hurt one," he shouted. "Keep firing." But the victory was short-lived. The damaged ship turned toward Stone's fighter, and he found himself staring into what looked like a giant eye. The eye blinked, and suddenly Stone's fighter was being pulled toward the alien ship by some invisible force. "I can't break free," Stone shouted into his radio. "It's got me." His fighter was sucked into an opening in the harvester ship's hull. The opening closed behind him, sealing him inside. Stone expected to die, but instead he found himself in a corridor filled with breathable air. The walls around him pulsed with veins of green light. Stone drew his sidearm and began to explore. The corridor was warm and humid, like being inside a living creature, which, he realized with growing horror, was exactly where he was. The harvester ships weren't just vessels. They were alive. He found other humans in the ship's depths. They were trapped in pods made of the same organic material as the ship itself. Some were still conscious, their eyes wide with terror. Others had been changed, their bodies stretched and twisted into shapes that barely looked human anymore. "Help me," one of them whispered. It was a woman, her face pale and drawn. "Please help me." Stone tried to break her free, but the pod was too strong. Worse, he could see that it was connected to her body by tubes that pulsed with fluid. She was being slowly consumed, kept alive while the ship fed on her. "I'll come back," he promised. Though he had no idea how Stone fought his way back to his fighter, killing two creatures that looked like walking skeletons along the way. The Hellcat's engine still worked, and he managed to blast his way out of the alien ship. But what he had seen inside would haunt him forever. The battle raged for 6 hours. The human fleet fought with everything they had, but the harvesters were too strong. For every alien ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Worse, the harvesters were learning human tactics with frightening speed. Admiral Hughes watched his fleet die ship by ship. The brave men and women under his command fought to the end, but it wasn't enough. Finally, with only 12 ships left, he gave the order to retreat. All ships fall back to Earth. We can't win this fight. The surviving human ships jumped to hyperspace, leaving the harvesters to complete their work. The mining colonies were consumed just like New Texas, their populations harvested and their resources stripped away. General Kate Williams stood in the command center on Earth, watching the reports come in. She was a tall woman with gray hair and hard eyes, a veteran of 3 wars. But nothing had prepared her for this. How many ships did we lose? She asked Admiral Hughes when he returned. 48 out of 60, Hughes replied. His face was grim. And we barely scratched them. They're not just advanced, General. They're something else entirely. Dr. Lisa Park entered the command center, carrying a data pad. She was a small woman with dark hair and intense eyes, humanity's leading expert on alien life. I've analyzed the sensor data from the battle, she said. The harvesters aren't just using advanced technology. They're manipulating the basic laws of physics. Explain, Williams ordered. Their weapons don't just destroy matter. They remove it from existence entirely. And their ships aren't built. They're grown. Each one is a living organism, probably hundreds of years old. Hughes felt sick. That explains why they could heal themselves. We weren't fighting ships, we were fighting animals. Worse than that, Dr. Park continued. I've detected traces of human DNA in their hull material. They're incorporating our people into their ships, making them part of their biology. The room fell silent. The implications were horrifying. The harvesters weren't just killing humans. They were making them part of their war machine. How many worlds have they hit now? Williams asked. 17, Hughes replied. Always the same pattern. They arrive, consume everything, then move on. No communication, no negotiation, no mercy. Williams studied the star map on the wall. Red dots marked the dead worlds, a spreading cancer across human space. They're heading for the core worlds, the big colonies with billions of people. We need to evacuate, Hughes said. Get the civilians to safety. Where? Williams asked. They can travel faster than us, hit harder than us, and they never seem to get tired. There's no safety from these things, Dr. Park spoke up. I need more data. Samples from their ships, recordings from inside their vessels. Commander Stone's report is helpful, but we need more. What are you thinking? Williams asked. If they're biological, they might have weaknesses we can exploit. All life forms have vulnerabilities. We just need to find theirs. Hughes shook his head. Even if we find a weakness, we don't have the ships to exploit it. They destroyed most of our fleet in one battle. Williams was quiet for a long moment, staring at the red dots on the map. Each one represented millions of dead humans, entire worlds wiped from existence. Then we build more ships, and we make them better. With what? Hughes asked. They consumed our mining colonies. Half our shipyards are gone. Then we use what we have, Williams said firmly. We convert civilian ships, cargo haulers, even private yachts. Every human who can hold a weapon gets one. Every ship that can carry missiles gets turned into a warship. Dr. Park nodded. And I'll keep studying them. There has to be a way to hurt them, to make them pay for what they've done. Outside the command center, Earth continued its slow rotation. The planet looked peaceful from space, blue and green and beautiful. But the people on its surface knew that peace was ending. The harvesters had found humanity, and they were coming. The war had begun, and humanity was losing badly. But they were still fighting, still hoping, still believing they could find a way to win. The harvesters had made one mistake when they chose to hunt humans. They had made it personal. 6 months into the war, humanity was dying. Half of the colonies had been consumed by the harvesters, their populations erased from existence. The alien fleet had grown from hundreds to thousands of ships, each one bloated with the resources of dead worlds. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his new command, the battleship Thunder. The Starfire had been destroyed 3 months ago during the defense of Proxima Station. Morrison had watched his old ship burn as he escaped in a life pod. Another defeat in humanity's losing war. Now he commanded one of the last major fleets, defending the industrial world of New Chicago. The planet's factories had been working around the clock, building weapons and ships for the war effort. 8 million people lived on New Chicago, and they all knew the harvesters were coming. "Sensors are picking up hyperspace distortions," reported Lieutenant Amy Carter. She had transferred to Morrison's new ship after the Starfire's destruction. Her blonde hair was streaked with gray now, aged by months of constant fear and fighting. Morrison nodded grimly. "How many ships this time?" 250 confirmed contacts, sir. Maybe more behind them." Morrison closed his eyes for a moment. His fleet had 43 ships, half of them converted cargo haulers with weapons bolted to their hulls. The odds were hopeless, but they would fight anyway. That's what humans did. All ships, battle stations. Today we make them pay. For every inch. The harvesters dropped out of hyperspace like a plague of locusts. But these ships looked different from the ones that had attacked New Texas. They were larger, more twisted, with growths that pulsed with sickly light. Worse, Morrison could see human faces pressed against their hulls, the features stretched and distorted, but still recognizable. "Dear God," whispered Amy. "Are those people?" Morrison felt his stomach turn. The harvesters had evolved. They weren't just consuming humans anymore. They were incorporating them into their ships while keeping them alive. The vessels were covered with the faces of their victims. Trapped forever in living metal and flesh, the battle began badly and got worse. Human weapons that had been upgraded with salvaged alien technology still couldn't penetrate the harvester hulls. But the alien weapons had become more horrible. Instead of simply erasing human ships, they now reached out with tendrils of energy that wrapped around the vessels and began to change them. Morrison watched in horror as the cruiser Defiant was caught by one of these tendrils. The ship's hull began to ripple and change, turning from metal to something that looked like skin. The crew's screams echoed over the radio as they were absorbed into their own vessel. "Captain, we need to retreat," Amy said, her voice shaking. "We can't win this." Morrison wanted to agree, but he knew there was nowhere to run. The harvesters had cut off all escape routes. This was humanity's last stand at New Chicago, and they were losing. Then something even worse happened. The harvesters deployed ground troops. Colonel Dan Pierce led the evacuation efforts on New Chicago's surface. He was a tough man with 30 years of military service. But what he saw coming down from the alien ships made his blood freeze. The creatures that landed on New Chicago had once been human. Pierce could tell because some of them still wore the uniforms of Earth's military forces. But they had been changed, twisted into something that barely resembled their original forms. Their limbs were stretched and bent at impossible angles. Their faces were a mixture of human features and alien growths. "They're using our own people against us," Pierce said into his radio. "The harvesters are turning humans into weapons." One of the creatures approached Pierce's position. It had been a woman once. He could tell from the shape of her face. But now she had 4 arms ending in claws, and her eyes glowed with the same green light as the harvester ships. "Help me," the creature said in a voice that was almost human. "Please help me." Pierce aimed his rifle at the thing, but hesitated. Was there still a person inside that twisted form? Could she be saved? The creature attacked before he could decide. Its claws raked across his armor, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Pierce fired, his rifle sending pulses of energy into the creature's chest. It fell, but not before Pierce saw the relief in its glowing eyes. "Thank you," it whispered as it died. Pierce's unit fought their way through the streets of New Chicago, trying to get civilians to the evacuation ships. But the harvesters had a new trick. They weren't just turning humans into ground troops. They were broadcasting something into the minds of everyone on the planet. It started as whispers at the edge of hearing. Then it became screams, the voices of everyone the harvesters had ever consumed. Millions of dead humans crying out in agony, their pain transmitted directly into the brains of the living. People began to collapse in the streets, their minds overwhelmed by the psychic assault. Some went insane, babbling about the voices in their heads. Others simply gave up, lying down and waiting for death. "We need to get off this planet now," Pierce said into his radio. "The harvesters are attacking our minds." In space, the battle was almost over. Morrison's fleet was down to 15 ships, all of them damaged. The Thunder's hull was cracked in 3 places, and half his crew was dead. But they kept fighting because there was nothing else to do. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildup." From the lead harvester ship, Amy reported. "It's targeting the planet directly." Morrison felt his heart sink. The harvesters were going to attack New Chicago itself, probably with the same weapon that had consumed the other worlds. 8 million people would die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But then something unexpected happened. The harvesters stopped their attack. Instead of firing on New Chicago, they began to broadcast a message. It came through every communication system at once, but this time it wasn't the cold voice of the harvesters. This time it was human voices, thousands of them speaking in unison. "We were like you once," the voices said. "We fought the harvesters and lost. Now we are part of them, and we feel their hunger. Submit to them, and your pain will end quickly. Fight them, and you will become like us, forever screaming in the darkness." Morrison realized what he was hearing. It was the voices of everyone the harvesters had consumed, now forced to serve as their mouthpiece. The aliens were using humanity's own dead as psychological weapons. "Turn off the communications," Morrison ordered. "Cut all channels." But it was too late. The message was being broadcast directly into people's minds, just like the screams on New Chicago. All across human space, people were hearing the voices of their dead friends and family members, begging them to surrender. The psychological warfare was devastating. Entire colonies began to surrender without firing a shot. Military units laid down their weapons rather than face the fate of becoming part of the harvester fleet. Humanity's will to fight was crumbling. Morrison managed to evacuate some of his fleet from New Chicago before the planet fell. But as they jumped to hyperspace, he watched the harvesters begin their feeding process. The 8 million people on the surface would be consumed, then turned into weapons against other humans. The surviving ships regrouped at a secret base in the asteroid belt. Morrison found himself in a meeting with the few remaining military leaders. General Kate Williams looked older than her years. Her gray hair turned white by the stress of command. "How many ships do we have left?" she asked. Admiral Hughes, who had somehow survived the destruction of 3 different flagships, consulted his datapad. "Maybe 200 vessels across all fleets. Most of them are damaged. And the harvesters? Over 3,000 ships. And they're still growing. Every world they take makes them stronger." Dr. Lisa Park was there too, but she looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her eyes were bloodshot and her hands shook as she held her research notes. "I've been studying the prisoners they've taken," she said. "The process of conversion is cohesion, is process of conversion, is a process of conversion." "Worse than we thought." "How so?" Williams asked. "They don't just absorb people. They keep them conscious during the entire process. Every human they've ever taken is still alive inside their ships, aware of what's happening, but unable to do anything about it. They're being tortured on a scale that's impossible to imagine. The room fell silent. The implications were horrifying. Every person the harvesters had taken, every world they had consumed, was still suffering somewhere inside those alien ships. There has to be a way to fight them, Morrison said. We can't just give up. Williams looked around the table at the desperate faces of humanity's last defenders. Dr. Park, you've been working on something. Some kind of weapon, Park nodded slowly. The Omega Protocol. It's theoretical, and it's dangerous. If we try it, we might win the war, but we'll lose something else in the process. What do you mean? To beat the harvesters, we'll have to become something they can't absorb or control. But that means changing what it means to be human. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Change how? I can't say for certain. The process is untested. But based on my research, anyone who undergoes the treatment won't be human anymore. They'll be something else, something designed specifically to fight the harvesters. Williams was quiet for a long moment. Outside the meeting room, the last free humans in the galaxy went about their daily routines, unaware that their leaders were discussing the end of their species. How long do we have? Williams finally asked. The Omega Protocol began in a secret laboratory buried deep inside an asteroid. Dr. Lisa Park stood before a machine that looked like it belonged in a nightmare. Cables and wires connected to tanks filled with glowing green fluid, the same substance they had found in captured harvester technology. Are you sure about this? She asked Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner. He was young, maybe 30, with dark hair and steady eyes. He had volunteered to be the first test subject, knowing he might not survive. Someone has to try it, Turner replied. If we don't change, we all die anyway. Park nodded and began the process. The machine hummed to life, and Turner was lowered into one of the tanks. The green fluid covered his body as electrodes attached to his skull. Park watched the monitors, hoping she wasn't about to kill the bravest man she had ever met. The transformation took 12 hours. Turner screamed for the first 6, his body convulsing as the alien technology rewrote his DNA. For the next 6 hours, he was silent, floating in the tank like a corpse. Park checked his vital signs every few minutes, afraid she would find nothing. When Turner finally opened his eyes, they were different. Still human, but with flecks of silver that seemed to move on their own. He climbed out of the tank and stood before Park, water dripping from his naked body. How do you feel? She asked. Turner was quiet for a moment, his head tilted as if listening to something she couldn't hear. I can see them, he said finally. The harvesters. Not just their ships, but what they really are. They're not alive, Dr. Park. They're something else, something that exists between life and death. What do you mean? They feed on suffering because that's all they understand. They're beings of pure entropy, creatures that exist to unmake everything that lives. But now I can see how to fight them. Park ran tests on Turner for the next 3 days. His body had changed in ways that defied explanation. His reflexes were faster than any human should be able to move. His brain showed activity in areas that normally stayed dormant. Most disturbing of all, he could manipulate matter at the molecular level just by thinking about it. Show me, Park said during one test. Turner picked up a steel bar and closed his eyes. The metal began to flow like water, reshaping itself into a perfect sphere. Then he changed it into a flower, each petal made of polished steel, but looking as delicate as if it were real. How? Park whispered. I can see the connections between atoms, Turner explained. The harvesters taught me without meaning to. When they changed me, I learned to see reality the way they do. But I'm still human inside, so I can use it differently. The first batch of volunteers came forward after Turner's success. Captain Jake Morrison was among them, along with 50 other soldiers and pilots. They called themselves the Reapers, and each transformation was harder than the last. Morrison's change took 18 hours. When he emerged from the tank, his eyes were completely silver and his skin had a faint metallic sheen. But unlike Turner, Morrison had retained more of his human appearance. The process is getting easier, Dr. Park noted. Each person who goes through it makes it safer for the next. 1. Commander Rick Stone was next. His transformation was the most dramatic yet. When he came out of the tank, he could phase in and out of solid matter, passing through walls like a ghost. More importantly, he could extend this ability to his fighter ship, making it nearly impossible for the harvesters to target him. The first test of the Reapers came when a small harvester force attacked the asteroid base. 5 alien ships dropped out of hyperspace, expecting to find helpless humans. Instead, they found something that should not have existed. Morrison led the attack in his modified fighter. The ship itself had been changed by his touch, its hull flowing like liquid metal and its weapons powered by his will rather than conventional energy. When he engaged the lead harvester ship, the battle was unlike anything in human history. Morrison didn't just fire weapons at the alien vessel. He reached out with his mind and began to rewrite the ship's molecular structure. The harvester tried to regenerate, but Morrison was faster. He turned the alien's own biology against it, making its healing process consume it from within. The harvester ship died screaming, its organic hull dissolving into space. The other alien vessels tried to flee, but Stone's fighter was already among them. He phased through their hulls and attacked them from the inside, his presence somehow poisoning their living systems. Within an hour, all 5 harvester ships were dead. The Reapers had won their first victory, but the cost was becoming clear. When Morrison returned to the base, Park could see that he was changing further. His skin was more metallic now, and his eyes showed no emotion at all. "How do you feel?" she asked. Morrison considered the question for a long moment. "Different," he said finally. "I can still remember being human, but it feels like a dream now. The things I cared about before seem small and unimportant." Park felt a chill of fear. The Omega Protocol was working, but it was changing the volunteers into something that might not care about saving humanity anymore. The program expanded rapidly as the harvesters moved closer to Earth. Hundreds of volunteers underwent the transformation, each one emerging as something between human and alien. They retained their memories and personalities, but their priorities had shifted in ways that worried the remaining human leadership. General Kate Williams watched the Reapers train from an observation deck. They moved through combat exercises with inhuman grace, their bodies flowing like liquid when they needed to dodge attacks. They could manipulate matter with their thoughts, phase through solid objects, and most disturbing of all, they seemed to communicate without speaking. "Are they still on our side?" she asked Dr. Park. "I think so," Park replied. "But they're becoming something we can't understand. They're solving problems we didn't even know existed, but they're also losing interest in things that matter to normal humans." "Like what?" "Families, personal relationships, individual survival. They're starting to think like a collective, focused only on the mission to destroy the harvesters. Everything else is becoming irrelevant to them." Williams felt a cold knot in her stomach. "We created them to save humanity, but what if they decide humanity isn't worth saving?" The answer came during the next major battle. A harvester fleet of over 100 ships attacked the Mars colonies. The Reapers responded with 50 modified vessels, each one crewed by the transformed humans. Colonel Dan Pierce, now a Reaper himself, led the ground assault on Mars. His body had been changed so much that he barely looked human anymore. His limbs could stretch and bend in impossible ways, and his skin had turned a pale gray color that seemed to absorb light. When Pierce encountered harvester ground troops on Mars, he did something that shocked even his fellow Reapers. Instead of killing the converted humans, he began to change them back. His touch could reverse the harvester transformation, freeing the trapped consciousness inside the alien-modified bodies, but the freed humans were horrifying to look at. Their bodies were still twisted and wrong, but now they were aware of what had been done to them. Many begged Pierce to kill them rather than let them live in their corrupted forms. "I can free them," Pierce reported to the other Reapers. "But I can't fix what the Harvesters did to their bodies. They're conscious, but they're still monsters." Turner, who had become the unofficial leader of the Reapers, made a decision that chilled the human observers. "Then we give them peace," he said simply. Pierce nodded and began putting the freed humans out of their misery. It was an act of mercy, but it showed how far the Reapers had moved away from normal human thinking. They could make life and death decisions without emotion, focused only on the greater good. The battle for Mars lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Harvester fleet was completely destroyed, but so was most of Mars itself. The Reapers had used their reality-manipulating powers to turn the planet's own mass into a weapon, sacrificing the world to ensure the aliens could never use it. The surviving colonists were evacuated, but many of them looked at their Reaper rescuers with fear rather than gratitude. The transformed humans had saved them, but at a cost that normal people couldn't understand. After Mars, the Harvesters changed their tactics. They began to avoid direct confrontation with the Reapers, instead targeting worlds that had no Reaper protection. They seemed to recognize that humanity had created something dangerous, something that could threaten their existence. Dr. Park continued to study the Reapers, but her research was becoming more difficult. The transformed humans were evolving beyond her ability to understand them. They communicated in ways that seemed to bypass normal language, and their thought processes were becoming increasingly alien. "They're winning the war," she reported to General Williams. "But I'm not sure they remember why they're fighting anymore." Williams watched the latest reports from the front lines. The Reapers were pushing the Harvesters back, liberating world after world. But each victory came at a price that normal humans found difficult to accept. "What have we done?" Williams asked quietly. "We saved our species," Park replied. "But we may have lost our humanity in the process." The final phase of the war was about to begin, and nobody knew whether the creatures they had created would still care about saving the people they had once been. The final battle did not happen in space. It happened in a place that existed between dimensions, where the Harvesters had built their true home. The Reapers found it by following the quantum trails left by the alien ships, tracks that led deeper into reality than normal humans could see. Admiral Ben Hughes no longer looked human at all. His body had become something made of living metal and energy, connected to his flagship through quantum bonds that let him control the ship with his thoughts. The vessel itself had changed too, growing and flowing like a living thing but powered by human will instead of alien hunger. "All units, prepare for dimensional shift," Hughes commanded. His voice reached the other Reapers not through radio, but through the strange connection they all shared. 50 ships surrounded his flagship, each one crewed by humans who had given up their humanity to save their species. The fleet passed through layers of reality, like a knife cutting through paper. Normal space gave way to something stranger, a place where thoughts had weight and emotions could kill. This was where the Harvesters truly lived, in the spaces between what was real and what was possible. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the alien stronghold appear before them. It was not a station or a planet, but something that hurt to look at directly. The structure seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once, its walls folding in on themselves in ways that made his enhanced mind struggle to understand. "The Queen is in there," said Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner, who had become something like the voice of the Reaper Collective. "I can feel her thoughts. She's old, older than our sun. She remembers when the universe was young and empty." Morrison nodded. The Harvester Queen was the source of the alien hive mind, the creature that had guided their species for millions of years. She had consumed entire galaxies, turning living worlds into food for her endless hunger. The Reapers attacked the stronghold with weapons that normal humans could never have imagined. They tore holes in space itself, reached across dimensions to strike at their enemies, and rewrote the laws of physics to suit their needs. But the Harvesters fought back with equal fury. Commander Rick Stone, his body now more energy than matter, phased through the stronghold's walls. Inside, he found horrors that would have driven a normal human insane. The structure was built from the compressed suffering of billions of creatures. Their pain turned into a kind of living architecture. Walls were covered with faces, not just human, but from thousands of different species the Harvesters had consumed over the eons. Each face was still conscious, still screaming, trapped forever in the alien structure. Stone realized he was looking at the collective memory of every world the Harvesters had ever destroyed. "They're all still here," he reported to the other. "Reapers, everyone they ever killed is trapped in this place." Morrison felt something that might have been rage, though emotions were becoming harder for him to understand. "Then we free them all." The Reapers pushed deeper into the stronghold, their transformed bodies allowing them to survive in an environment that existed partially outside normal reality. They found chambers filled with pure thought, corridors made of crystallized time, and pools of liquid suffering that the Harvesters used for sustenance. But as they advanced, the Queen began to fight back in ways they had not expected. She did not attack their bodies or their ships. Instead, she attacked their minds, trying to show them the truth of what they had become. "Look at yourselves," her voice echoed through their consciousness. "You call yourselves human, but what human could do the things you do? What human could exist in this place without going mad? You have become worse than us, creatures of chaos and destruction." Morrison felt the Queen's words trying to burrow into his mind. She was right in some ways. The Reapers had done terrible things in their war against the Harvesters. They had sacrificed worlds, killed innocents, and transformed themselves into monsters, but they had done it for a reason. "We became what we needed to become," Morrison replied, his thoughts cutting through the Queen's mental assault. "You forced us to evolve. Evolution?" The Queen's laughter was like the sound of dying stars. "You call this evolution? You have destroyed your own species to create something that can barely remember what it was fighting for." The Queen was not wrong. Morrison could barely remember what it felt like to be human. The emotions and connections that had once driven him seemed distant now, like memories from someone else's life. But one thing remained clear in his transformed mind: the mission to protect what was left of humanity. The final confrontation took place in the heart of the stronghold, a chamber that existed at the center of all possible realities. The Harvester Queen was there, but she was not what Morrison had expected. She was not a creature of flesh or even energy, but something made of pure concept, an idea that had learned to think and hunger. "I am entropy," she said, her form shifting between different possibilities. "I am the end of all things, the final silence that waits at the universe's death. You cannot destroy me because I am destruction itself." Morrison and the other Reapers surrounded the Queen, their transformed bodies existing partially in multiple dimensions. They had become something between matter and thought, able to fight concepts with concepts. "You're right," Turner said, his voice echoing strangely in the impossible space. "We can't destroy you, but we can do something else." The Reapers began to change the Queen, not trying to kill her but to transform her, the same way they had been transformed. They reached into her essential nature and began to rewrite what she was, forcing her to evolve beyond her need to consume other life. The process was agonizing for both sides. The Queen fought with the power of eons, trying to unmake the Reapers at the quantum level. But the humans had learned to exist in ways that the Queen could not understand. They were chaos and order at the same time, destruction and creation united in a way that should have been impossible. Slowly, painfully, the queen began to change. Her hunger faded, replaced by something new. The need to consume was transformed into a desire to protect, to nurture rather than destroy. She was still powerful, still ancient, but no longer driven by an endless appetite for suffering. "What have you done to me?" the queen whispered, her voice now filled with something that might have been wonder. "We made you like us," Morrison replied. "Something that can choose what it wants to be." With the queen transformed, the rest of the harvester species began to change as well. The hive mind that had driven them to consume worlds for millions of years started to dissolve, replaced by individual consciousness and free will. They were still powerful, still dangerous, but no longer driven by an instinct to harvest other life. The war was over, but the cost was beyond calculation. The Reapers had won by becoming something that was no longer recognizably human. They existed now in dimensions that normal people could not perceive. Guardians of reality itself, but cut off from the species they had saved. Dr. Lisa Park, still human and still mortal, watched from Earth as the last harvester ships were transformed into something benign. The galaxy was safe, but the protectors who had saved it could no longer return home. "Will we ever see them again?" General Kate Williams asked. Park looked up at the stars, knowing that somewhere among them, the Reapers continued their eternal watch. "I don't think so. They've moved beyond us now. They exist to protect reality from threats we can't even imagine." Was it worth it? Park was quiet for a long moment. "Ask me in 100 years, when the children who are born now have children of their own. If humanity survives and grows and learns to be better than we were, then maybe it was worth it." On Earth and the other human worlds, people began to rebuild. New colonies were founded, new technologies developed, new stories told. The children born after the war would never know how close their species had come to extinction, or what had been sacrificed to save them. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between day and night, people would look up at the stars and feel a presence watching over them. The Reapers were still there, transformed beyond recognition, but still remembering their human origins. They had become the universe's immune system, protecting all life from threats that existed beyond normal understanding. Harvesters had unleashed hell upon humanity, expecting to find easy prey. Instead, they had found a species capable of becoming something worse than any nightmare. Humanity had responded to cosmic horror with cosmic evolution, sacrificing their own nature to become the guardians that the universe needed. The galaxy was safe, the war was won, and somewhere in dimensions beyond counting, the things that had once been human continued their eternal watch. They had saved their species by ceasing to be part of it, becoming something new and strange and wonderful. And terrible. In the end, that was the most human thing of all.